Okay, so first of all, I just want to ask, how many people here have read voicebot.ai at some point? That's pretty good. This side of the room, you need to do some work. You have Wi-Fi here, voicebot.ai, okay? You can check that out. How many people have looked at voicebot.ai or listened to the VoiceBot podcast this week? Come see me afterwards. We love you. I have a couple of my colleagues in the back, Ava Muchler and Eric Schwartz. Please raise your hands. Everyone turn around. They do most of the work. Please say thank you. Yes. Give them a round of applause. So VoiceBot is, I don't know, it's probably the best known as kind of a labor of love. We got into this because we were working in the industry. I've been working in voice pre-Alexa on mobile, and just wound up finding that there was this problem when we were trying to do some research. There was no good data out there. So we created something that we needed, and then we shared it with a bunch of people, and then they're like, oh, now we have to keep doing this. So that's why I'm here today, because once I start doing something, I have trouble giving up. So we do a lot of research, news. We show up a lot of different places. I think, first off, so at Bret Kinsella, so you guys like to tweet, light up my Twitter, that'd be great. We love that. To get people to know what's going on out here. And some of you saw me doing some interviews with Matt, with Brandon Kaplan and a couple other folks. One of the things we like to do is when we come to these events, we like to share it. And because there's a lot of people in the industry, it really is a robust community that don't get a chance to come to these events. And so we share it through the podcast. And so check out VoiceBot podcast as well. We also have a really killer newsletter that a lot of people don't know about, but Voice Insider. So look at that. That's stuff that doesn't get published elsewhere. So it's kind of the inside stuff. How many people in this room are concerned about the rise of the robot overlords? One guy, okay. So yeah, this is a tech-forward community, so probably not as much, although we could have Elon Musk here, and he would be in the front row right now. I don't know if a lot of people saw this, but this was a robot at CES this year. Along came a self-driving car, down goes the robot. So if you think that the embodied robot is what you should be worried about in terms of the robot overlords, it's not. It's the self-driving cars, which we all think are going to be great and benign. Those are the ones that are going to take over. That's dangerous.
It was a stunt.
Yes, it was a stunt. Of course it was. Look at that robot. It's ridiculous. I just feel bad for the guy that was inside of it. And so, in any event, I want to talk about three things today. I'm going to talk about voice evolution. I'm going to talk about data. If people know voicebot.ai, they probably know that we publish more than anybody else on data. We do a lot of analysis. So we're a good repository for that. And then we're going to go really quickly through some things brands are doing so you get that baseline. And so that's my objective here today. Okay, so the first thing, evolution. People might recognize this, popularized by Jeffrey Moore, but it actually comes from the 1950s. It is the technology adoption life cycle. It's nicely segmented into 5 different areas. What you can see by those flags is where we are specifically for smart speakers. Now, there's a broader conversation about voice assistants. It's more muddled, but this is an easy way to determine or to show you a key point here. What you see is about the first 16% of any market for any technology adoption. Anybody who's up here, the stage ends. 16% ends right around early adopters. This is pretty consistent across new technologies. It happened with social media, it happened with mobile. What happens is when you move into the early majority, expectations change. And business strategies change as a result. Different people enter, they offer different features. Consumers have different expectations about what those features should be, how they want to interact. So one of the things I like to point out to people is phase 1 of voice assistants are over, okay? So phase 1 was, we talked about Siri is sort of the modern era. There were some voice assistants before that, but most of them weren't very good and certainly weren't broad-based in terms of their capabilities. So we had Siri, we had Amazon Echo, Google Home. We had 1 billion devices last fall. It's up to 2 billion devices now. It's a lot of stuff. Now we're seeing something different going on, and what we're seeing is voice is not contained by a device. So in the past, we had the web was in the PC, and then we had mobile apps were on mobile devices. All of these technologies were captive to a device, or many of them that we talk about in terms of these other eras, in terms of platforms. Voice is not. It actually is traversing platforms. And you already see in the early days, it's started in one area, became really popular in another, and now it's moving to other areas. So what we see from a supply side standpoint, so the people who are building this technology, is they were focused on introduction and reach, right? And now they're moving into this whole idea of specialization and habituation. They're trying to get into these really specific use cases. So that's one of the things that's different. And that's actually really well aligned with what we just saw in terms of that adoption life cycle, because it fits with what consumers want. Now, I will tell you that I'm really focused on the data. So I was working in the rise of the web in the 1990s. I worked in mobile and social. I tend to have been on the front end of a lot of these technology life cycles. And I've seen those areas that we said, those were all successful. But I've seen several others that were not as successful. I was very big in RFID and some other areas that didn't get as big. And one of the things that I've learned over the years is the consumer data tells the story. So it's important for the suppliers of the technology to invest, to push it forward, but you've got to look at what the consumers are doing in order to understand where this is going to head. And, a perfect example right now is AR, VR have been the next big thing for a long time. Where are we headed there, right? Consumers haven't gotten there yet. Until the consumers start to spark and move that adoption curve up quickly, we're not going to see AR, VR take off, no matter how badly Apple wants it to happen. Okay, so let's talk about smart speakers, because it's recatalyzed it. Siri created this market of the voice assistant, the consumer-based general purpose voice assistant, but it grew really big. They didn't expand the feature set. They didn't really understand beyond the early adopter. They basically just said, hey, we've got these features, we're going to harden them. Smart speakers came in and said, hey, we're going to do something completely different. And in fact, a lot of people didn't realize that the far-field microphone is in many ways the bigger invention that happened as opposed to some of these advancements in the voice assistants themselves, because it allowed you to think of all these new use cases in the home. A lot of them, as Matt Hartman talked about, are audio related, but there's several other ones as well. Well, what happened is a lot of people said, oh, well, smart speakers, voice assistants, they're not going to be popular. There's no killer app. Well, yes, there is a killer app. There's listening to streaming music, there's asking questions, there's finding out the weather, and then there's a couple others like setting timers and alarms where you cross the room, you don't have to take your phone out. So that's why people are buying them. And we see it in the data over and over again in terms of what people like and why they're buying it. Now, there might be other applications as well that really are big, but I think it's kind of comical that people say, oh, there's no killer app. Well, what we're doing is we're taking other things that were existent elsewhere and we're putting them into a new environment, and consumers seem to love them, and we see this in the data. So last year in January, we had a little over 47 million. This year we have 66 million. It's a 40% growth. And that's after a year where we had like 200% growth. The other thing is, this is new out this week from Loop Ventures. Here's their forecast. They put us at about 72 million smart speakers will be sold this year. And that's going to grow up to almost 300 million in 2025. So we have all of these things around smart speakers in particular that being very important. Now, what I would say is it's not just about smart speakers. Smart speakers are just one area that you should look at, but I look at that as a leading indicator of what's going on with voice. Let's look at some other data. So first of all, a lot of people talk about smart speakers, but it is third in terms of surfaces where people are using voice assistants. There's about 60% more people are using voice assistants on a monthly basis in the car, and almost double are using it on smartphones, right? So some of the applications are a little bit different. Don't have time to go into a lot of that today, but what we see is that this expectation around consumers that they be able to speak and then get some information back or get a task completed is starting to become a new situation that they are embedding into their lives or habituating around it. Okay, so the other thing that I think is really interesting, we think about this idea of voice first, but not voice only. So very few people know that half of Google Assistant sessions are multimodal. What multimodal means is it's not voice only. It's with the screen. And most of this is going to be on the smartphone. Now they do have Google Home Hub, it'll be called Nest Hub soon, which is this smart display, and it's this voice first interaction tablet. But that's a very small percentage of this. A lot of it is people are interacting with the text and the voice on the phone and some images, and that's going to be very important. And then the other half are doing these voice-only experiences. So it's going to be a balance. And Google, because of their unique position in the market, has already shown how this is going to take place. The other thing we see is just smart displays in particular, these smart voice-first tablets, they've grown significantly. So people like this idea of having a voice-addressable screen. Right? So if you look at this, they grew from 2.8% to 13.2% of smart speaker owners have these devices year over year. So all of a sudden they said, oh, I like this with a screenless device, but there are some situations where a screen might be nice, in the kitchen, maybe some other situations, and so that's what we're seeing there. The other thing I thought I would point out is market share, but specifically to emphasize a point for those of you who aren't just focused on the US. So in the US, by the way, Loop Ventures says that Amazon Echo will be outsold by Google Home in 4 years in terms of units sold per year, right? But they're still going to maintain a certain amount of market share, particularly users, because they have so many. I think up through 2025, they will have sold like 650 million units based on that forecast, right? And Google will be something like 500 million at that point. But what you see is they came to market first. They were at 100% market share. We saw it go to 80, then 70. Now we're down to 60, and they'll drop into the 50s probably this year, somewhere in mid-50s, as Google's been moving up and some of these other players have come on. Really interesting. You go to Canada, Google Home beat Amazon Alexa to market by about 8 months, and it's almost opposite in terms of the market share. So when you're thinking about this from a global perspective, you have to understand that different markets have evolved differently. And in general, if you were first to market, you're probably going to have leading market share today. Whether that'll be true 10 years from now is a completely different story. But keep that in mind. It's hard to support just one platform today. You really need to support at least those two. The other thing was we go back to this idea of surfaces. Well, one of the things we found in our research is that over a third of smart speaker owners say that after they get a smart speaker in the home, they start using voice assistant more on their phone, right? And so one of the things we see is that daily voice assistant users are they're twice as likely to be owners of smart speakers and to also use it on their phone. So these things play together, and this idea of voice is independent of device at this point. So consumers are already starting to grasp this. They get used to asking for things with their smart speaker at home, then they're out and about and they're, oh, why can't I ask for this? I don't have the device. Oh, I've got this device in my pocket. It can do essentially the same thing. And that's also expanding the expectations around use cases on the smartphone. In terms of market share, very different. We saw that Apple Siri had something under 5% market share in smart speakers. When we go to smartphones, they are today the leading player. So they've got over 500 million devices with Siri available. They've got something like 400 million monthly active users. That's bigger than everybody else and probably everyone else combined. Google's moving quickly up into that and will rival and surpass them soon. But this is a way to start thinking about the idea that this is what the consumers are doing. Okay, we talked about 2 billion devices. This is how it looks. Amazon gets a ton of press around this. They've done tremendous things. They essentially created this idea of the smart home, or voice-activated smart home, and ambient computing. And they've got really strong position there. But all these other players had these existing platforms that they're pushing voice through. Now, this is availability. So distribution is important. And so all these other players have distribution. But when you look at it, actually, the Amazon users are using it more frequently. So they've got that going for them. And eventually, they'll get more distribution. Okay, what does this all tell me? Microphones will soon be everywhere. In fact, microphones are already everywhere. So as a brand, what does this mean to you, right? So one of the things we want to talk about today is like, how can marketers think about this? What should they be doing? Well, we developed this model, I don't know, 3-4 years ago. There's 7 things that brands and enterprises can do. And so we're just going to walk through each of these really quickly. The first is generate awareness. So by putting this out there and having these addressable voice apps, you can look at Progressive, Boston Children's. They generate awareness, and one of the ways they do that is by answering questions that you just have in general. You're not asking Boston Children's about flu treatment. You're not necessarily asking for Progressive to tell you about getting an auto loan. But when you ask those things to either Alexa or Google Assistant, in this case, very often you will be recommended or shuttled off to one of these voice apps to answer it, and they're just answering that question, fulfilling your need, but it's known that this is a branded player that's doing that, so you might not be thinking about these players, but then you are after you are able to get an answer to your general question. The other thing is creating engagement. So did anybody here try the Westworld skill, Alexa skill that came out last year? A couple people. So really pretty crazy how good that was, right? Really high production value. I couldn't do it. I don't really watch Westworld, so it was too hard for me because it's trivia based and you couldn't advance if you didn't actually watch the show. But that really wasn't the point. What the creators of the Alexa skill told me was this was for super fans. They wanted a way for them to have greater experience with the brand after they finished watching it, and, in pretty much the end of the series at that point. I think the Rain agency folks are here. Rain? Oh, you're right there, right in front. Thank you for being in the front row. You're good to see you. So Tide, they answer all of your stain removal skills or problems, and it's a way to keep Tide top of mind, right? So they own that moment of stain removal, and they own it not just on the web, but now they own it in these voice-first environments. Also, facilitating transactions. Has anyone tried Bank of America Erica? A couple people? What do you think?
I like it.
Anybody?
It's good.
Okay, you're okay. Two thumbs up, one okay. I think it's really amazing if you look at the reviews. So I've spent a good amount of time looking at the reviews for Erica, and people are like, oh, I found all these great features that I didn't know were there. Right? So it's not just that they get this great interaction, it's a little faster, maybe more convenient sometimes, but when you try to put a lot of features inside of a mobile app, they become hidden. People don't know they're there. And there's this one guy in one of these reviews who talked about how he saved 15 minutes. It was something that he was calling the bank every quarter for, or something like that. He didn't know there's another way to get it. And yet, he just asked Erica, and Erica gave it to him in seconds, right? And this is a whole nother thing about this idea that you don't have to just be Alexa or Google Assistant. Bank of America, to the tune of $60 million, built their own voice assistant, and they're sustaining that, but they're owning that entire user experience, and they are owning all of that user data as well. Swedish is a hospital. They allow you to set appointments. Domino's, I think people know what they do. Okay, so content for product distribution. This is what Matt Hartman just talked about. Voice is another channel that's raising the availability and the import of audio in our lives. It's just like you ask and you get. It's all in the same type of paradigm. When you ask for something, you expect to hear audio back. And so for Washington Post or Entertainment Weekly, Skilled Creative worked on that. Okay, yeah, these guys. So they're creating a new way to distribute the content, and over time, this content, I expect in more of these cases, like Westworld, is going to become really interactive as well. But it's a new channel that people need to think of for content distribution. Another way that people are doing this is they're embedding voice into their product. So cars are likely the most obvious way. I mean, how many people have used voice assistant in a car? Right, a lot of you. I mean, almost everybody that owns a car has had the opportunity to do so at some point or another. So Mercedes-Benz, really fascinating at the Super Bowl this year. They had a 1-minute ad. They did not mention, you didn't see the car for 43 seconds. It was all about this voice control concept. And then the first thing you saw was him getting into the car, and then he interacted with the voice assistant. It wasn't about the car's power or smoothness or safety. It was all about this idea of voice interaction. It was fascinating. Sonos, if anybody has those, you can now have voice assistants, both Google Assistant and Amazon Alexa. Amazon really set a new expectation in terms of what type of features had to be on any type of speaker for home audio, and Sonos basically had to go along. It wasn't really a way for them to not be in that space and have that feature set. Delivering operational efficiency. We had a story today from JLL. They're a commercial real estate firm. Eric wrote the story. They have a new voice assistant that helps you execute processes and operations within your daily work life, right? And so there's other examples of that. Voicera will, or actually it's Voicea now. They used to be Voicera. They changed their name. You can ask them why. But what they do is they capture your meeting notes. They transcribe your meetings. They actually find the notes of what the action items are, separate those out, and publish those back to you. So all you have to do is edit them. So the whole idea is you can actually be more engaged in the meeting. You don't have to be worried about writing the notes. And then afterwards, if you have to do meeting summaries, it's already partially done. And if you miss the meeting, you've got it all. So you could be at 2 meetings at once. So another operational efficiency concept. And then service customers, I don't know if many people saw, Audible had an announcement where you can actually contact customer support through Echo smart speakers now. Capital One is doing a lot of things around support through their voice assistant, Eno. I had a great interview on the podcast with Margaret Mayer, who runs their whole AI group at Capital One just a couple of weeks ago. So that might be a resource if you're interested in this topic. So here are the things I want to leave with. If you are a brand in this space, don't be silent, because if you do not have a voice presence, you are silent. Ava and I have been doing a study around voice assistant responses to different types of common queries that consumers make. And wow, Wikipedia and Yelp dominate what people hear about your brand, right? If you don't have a voice app, you have no chance really to start to control that conversation around your brand. Monitor consumer expectations. They are changing pretty quickly. So the things that would have been nice to haves about a year ago really are expected today. So you need to keep up with that. I'd also say voice first, but not voice only. So start with voice first, that's fine. It needs to work in a voice only environment or you're really sort of out of the game. But start thinking about the fact that more and more of these interactions, maybe half of as many on Google Actions, are going to be with a screen as well, which might be text, might be visual, might be video, a lot of different ways that can manifest itself. Be very wary of voice app bloat. There's a lot of people trying to build too big of a voice app. So one of the things I like about Tide is this sort of does what it does, right? It answers questions. It doesn't try to sell you stuff. It doesn't try to tell you its view of Game of Thrones or anything like that. It just answers questions around stains, and it owns that moment. And so I think that's a really cool thing. When you think about voice, everything's a deep link, and that's the way you should think about it. So people who come from the web or mobile world, this idea of the deep link, you just get to what you need quickly. You don't have to do menu structure, all that stuff. Make it as easy as possible for people to get in and out, and a lot of times that means stripping away things that are unnecessary and really not aligned with the experience. And just think continuous improvement. So just back to this idea that you don't have to launch with everything to start, but launch with something that solves a specific problem. I've seen this time and time again. Do that. People have good experiences. And then it's actually pretty straightforward to start adding features and solutions over time. So I'm Bret Kinsella. Check us out at voicebot.ai, voicebot podcast. Tweet at Bret Kinsella if you liked or didn't like this, and I'll respond to you. Thank you.